The tow truck rolled in at sunrise, and by noon, his excavator was gone. That was the moment he knew this quiet HOA had just made a life-changing mistake. Ethan stood at the edge of the gravel lot, staring at the empty space where his excavator had been parked only hours earlier. That machine was not just metal and hydraulics. It was his livelihood, his schedule, and the backbone of a project that half the county depended on. The HOA notice taped to the fence fluttered in the breeze, claiming unauthorized equipment and community violations. Ethan read it twice, then folded it calmly. He had dealt with rules before. What surprised him was the confidence behind the decision. The HOA board clearly believed they had power here. What they did not know was who Ethan really was, or why that excavator was there in the first place. As neighbors peeked through curtains, Ethan made a single phone call, not in anger, but with quiet certainty. The tow was only the opening move. By sunset, meetings were already shifting, timelines were tightening, and unseen consequences were forming. The HOA thought they had enforced control. In reality, they had interrupted something much bigger, and the story of that interruption was only beginning to unfold. The HOA meeting room was calm, almost smug, as the board reviewed their decision. They believed rules had spoken louder than reason, and that confidence would soon crack. Ethan arrived unannounced, standing quietly at the back while the HOA president explained how the tow was standard procedure. Charts were referenced, bylaws quoted, and heads nodded in agreement. Ethan waited. When invited to speak, he didn't raise his voice or argue emotion. He simply asked one question about the timeline of the upcoming infrastructure project. The room paused. Some board members exchanged uncertain looks. Ethan explained that the excavator was registered, insured, and scheduled for work tied directly to that project. Still, the president dismissed him, insisting the HOA had authority over all equipment within its boundaries. Ethan thanked them politely and left. Outside, he checked his watch and made another call. That excavator was now sitting in a tow yard, but so were the permits, schedules, and labor contracts waiting on it. What the HOA didn't realize was that delays didn't just cost time. They cost trust, funding, and approvals. As the sun dipped lower, emails began circulating beyond the HOA, reaching offices that rarely tolerated disruption. The board went home confident. Ethan went home knowing the balance was about to shift. The first call came early the next morning, and it wasn't for Ethan, it was for the HOA, and it carried a tone they weren't prepared to hear. County representatives requested clarification on why a key piece of contracted equipment had been removed from an active project zone. The HOA president scrambled for explanations, repeating the same rules that once felt unshakable. Ethan, meanwhile, calmly submitted documentation showing he was the primary contractor assigned to oversee the very project the HOA had been waiting years to receive. His excavator wasn't a violation. It was essential. The tow had triggered an automatic delay notice, and with it, a funding review. Suddenly, the HOA's confidence dissolved into urgency. Emergency meetings were scheduled. Messages were left unanswered. Ethan received a polite request to discuss options. He didn't rush. He understood leverage, and he understood patience. That afternoon, the tow yard released the excavator without charge, but the damage was already done. Trust had been shaken, and accountability was coming. As board members realized the scope of their mistake, the narrative flipped. Ethan was no longer a rule breaker. He was the one person capable of moving the project forward, and he now held the power to decide how that story would continue. When Ethan returned with the excavator, the neighborhood felt different. The silence was heavier, filled with awareness instead of authority. The HOA president approached with forced politeness, offering apologies wrapped in procedure. Ethan listened without interruption. He explained, calmly and clearly, how the tow had violated contractual access terms and triggered oversight reviews that could not be undone. The project timeline was now under scrutiny, and delays would be documented. Ethan did not threaten. He stated facts. Residents gathered quietly, sensing that something larger than a dispute was unfolding. The HOA asked what could be done. Ethan answered honestly. Cooperation, transparency, and respect were no longer optional. They were required. He resumed work that afternoon, but not under the same conditions as before. New boundaries were drawn, both physical and professional. The HOA watched as progress resumed, realizing that their control had been replaced by accountability. That evening, board members received formal notices outlining corrective steps. The story was no longer about rules. It was about responsibility. And the realization settled in slowly, painfully, that power had shifted because of a single, careless decision. As days passed, progress accelerated, but tension lingered beneath the surface. Every completed task reminded the HOA of the authority they had overplayed. Ethan maintained professionalism, documenting every step, every interaction, every approval. Inspectors visited more frequently, and reports were filed with precise language. The HOA attempted friendliness, but their uncertainty was visible. Residents began asking questions, learning who Ethan was and why his work mattered. The narrative spread quietly, reshaping opinions. This was not a contractor who could be pushed around. He was a partner the project depended on. When the HOA requested minor changes, Ethan considered them carefully, approving only what aligned with regulations. There were no grudges, only boundaries. The board learned that respect was earned through understanding, not enforcement. By the end of the week, the project was ahead of schedule despite the disruption. That fact alone carried weight. The HOA had tried to assert dominance and instead revealed vulnerability. Ethan never celebrated the mistake. He simply allowed the consequences to speak. And those consequences were now visible to everyone involved. The final inspection arrived sooner than expected, bringing quiet relief. What once felt like conflict now felt like closure shaped by hard lessons. Inspectors praised the efficiency, noting how quickly setbacks had been addressed. The HOA stood by, attentive and careful, no longer eager to interrupt. Ethan presented final documentation, including the incident report tied to the tow. It wasn't punitive. It was factual. The HOA president acknowledged the error publicly, committing to revised procedures. Residents listened, understanding that the project's success came despite interference, not because of control. Ethan shook hands, accepted thanks, and loaded his equipment with practiced ease. The excavator that had been towed away now symbolized something else entirely. It represented the cost of assumptions and the value of knowing who holds responsibility. As Ethan drove away, the neighborhood returned to calm, but the memory remained. Authority without understanding had failed. Collaboration had succeeded. And that contrast would not be forgotten. The HOA never towed unauthorized equipment again after that day. They learned that power means nothing without awareness of who you're dealing with. Ethan's role in the project became a quiet legend among residents, a reminder that respect travels both ways. The HOA shifted its approach, focusing on communication instead of confrontation. Mistakes were acknowledged faster. Questions were asked sooner. The neighborhood benefited from lessons learned the hard way. Ethan didn't seek recognition, but his story carried weight beyond the project. It showed how calm confidence can outlast rigid authority, and how one careless decision can expose an entire system's weakness. The excavator was just a machine. But the reaction to its removal revealed everything. In the end, nothing dramatic needed to happen. No shouting, no threats, no chaos. Just facts, patience, and accountability. And that was enough to change everything, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you love the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.